success is really about building a group of people that are eagerly anticipating your next thing, your next release, your next show, your next anything. Because I think that the hardest part is to find your people. And if you find your people, that is going to keep you going, because they're there wondering when you're going to put out something new. Otherwise, if you don't have that, it's like, well, why should I even work on this song? No one's going to hear it anyway.
Welcome to the Successful Musician Podcast. I've got Bree Noble here with me today, a friend and one of the most interesting people in the music business that I've met. She has one of the most inspiring origin stories, we'll call it, of anybody I've met. So Bree, welcome, and tell us a little bit about kind of how you got started in the music business.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, let's see. So, as the typical musician says, like, I've been singing forever. I started singing when I was little, along with the radio. My mom bought me a piano when I was 6, and I started playing piano. Now, what was interesting about that is actually I have had glaucoma since birth. So I have like a rare recessive genetic disorder called congenital glaucoma. So most people get glaucoma when they're old, but I had it from birth. So I had a lot of eye surgeries when I was little. And so just the idea that my mom would be like, sure, you can play piano, no problem. Like, it didn't even occur to her that I couldn't play piano. And so I got this piano teacher that was like a friend of my grandparents. And she's like, I don't know, I've never taught anybody that has visual difficulty. Like, I don't even want to charge you. I don't even know if I can help her, And it turned out that, like, she did a fantastic job. And within, working with her for 2 years, I was playing in recitals and all of that. Learned how to read music, even though it was really hard for me to read it because it was small. Like, when you have glaucoma, you're very nearsighted. And so I would need to look up super close to the music in order to be able to see it. I needed to be large print and everything. And actually her husband was a blacksmith, like, on the side. I think it was just like a hobby. And he built this contraption thing that attached to the piano where you could pull, like, instead of just the regular where the music sits, it had like these sliders, and you could pull it, and I could put it like this close to my face and be able to actually see the music. So I could read while I was playing. It was a little hard because it's hard to see my hands with that right in front of my face, but that at least allowed me to learn how to read music and not just have to learn everything by ear. So I took piano lessons for, I think, 5-6 years. Typical junior hire, didn't want to practice all that. So I gave up, but I still kept playing on the side, and I started kind of writing little songs as high schoolers do in 4-chord progressions, because that's all you know how to do. And so I was doing that on the side, and I was in all these choirs in high school. I was in like every choir the high school offered. I was in the barbershop quartet. I did solo competitions. And I ended up going to college at Westmont College in Santa Barbara for music and music performance and vocal. And while I was there, I got the chance to perform with the school's ensemble, where we kind of performed, like, I'd say about every other weekend. We went out for the whole weekend, and we'd go to all these, churches and rescue missions and juvenile halls and things like that, where we would kind of talk about the spread of gospel message, but also talk about the school. We were like representing the school. And I learned how to perform in a group and solo and talk on stage and all that important stuff that you need to do. And we also got the opportunity to record some albums in downtown Santa Barbara at a pretty cool studio where people like Kenny Loggins and the Beach Boys recorded. And so that was kind of like my entree into music industry. And I absolutely loved it. And while I was there, I also kind of got the practical bug hit me, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this after school ends? I really have no idea. So I decided to also get a degree in business. So I left school with a degree in business, focus on accounting and management, and then vocal performance. And sure enough, like, my school did not teach me anything about how to go out and get a job as a musician or how in the world would I get gigs or anything. They're just like, okay, we made you this amazing musician. I drop you off on the side of the road and in a whole new town and figure out how to get a job or make money. And so I did fall back on my business degree, and I worked in accounting for several years. After I was newly married, my husband was in graduate school and I had to help support him. So I had to go out and get a job. And while I was doing that, I was always trying to do music on the side, but I really didn't know how. I was kind of putting ads in the recycler, trying to meet bands and be in bands, and most of them ended in disaster. And then I ended up becoming a director of finance at the opera company in Orange County, which was one of the top 15 opera companies in the US. And I got to be the director of finance there for 5 years. And I got the opportunity to hang out with all these cool artsy people and go see operas, sit in the front row and go to fancy parties and everything. But the hardest part about that job was that I saw all these opera artists like living their dreams, doing what they wanted to do. And even though I didn't want to be an opera artist, I was like, why am I not doing that? Why am I not doing anything in music? That's what I really want. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. And so after working there for 5 years, we managed to be able to sell our house and make quite a good profit on it and move closer to my husband's job. And I was able to quit working there. I worked at the opera part-time for a while after that, started raising kids, and it gave me that breathing room to like, I'm going to figure out this music career thing. And so while I was home with my daughter, who was little, I started, I was trying to figure out like, how could I actually make a career out of this? And one day it just hit me, there's no reason why you can't build a music business just like you'd build any other small business. I knew small business. I'd gotten a degree in it. And I knew music. I'd gotten a degree in it, but I didn't like put them together. And so finally I was like, forget all this music industry stuff. Forget about these like gatekeepers and decision makers and needing a manager or any of those things. I don't need those things. I can just go out there and be my own entrepreneur as a musician. And so that's what I started doing. And I started grassroots. I started with my church and people that I knew at my church, and just started spreading out from there. It turns out people at my church knew a lot of other people, and they were involved in organizations that needed music for their programs. And then those people, were corporate people that needed music for their corporate events. And so it was just this big web of connections. And that's how I started building my career. And at that time, my daughter was little, and I recorded my first album when she was 2. I started going on tour when she was 3. And what I did was I built a career around what was convenient for me and what fit my circumstances, which was performing for groups where there was a bunch of other moms. There's an organization called Mothers of Preschoolers. And I was performing for them. They always needed a program every 2 weeks when they met. And so I started doing a speaking and singing program for them, kind of about my life story and growing up with glaucoma. And it was kind of like an inspirational thing that weaved in my own music. And I was doing that for several years. I probably visited almost every MOPS group in California and even some up in Oregon, because I was just kind of networking, and one would find out about me and they'd tell another and that kind of thing. And I also did a lot of community groups and women's groups. And not once did I perform at a bar or a club or any of that like traditional music industry stuff. But yet my schedule was full. I was selling plenty of merch. And I was not even having, at one point, I didn't even have to call out anymore. I was getting plenty of referrals. And that was when I felt like, okay, this thing is like really working. Like, I don't ever even have to make a cold call. They're all coming to me. I'm filling up my calendar as much as I want with local gigs because I lived in Southern California. So there was plenty of cities. I did everything from senior centers to community groups, corporate stuff, women's groups, churches, all of that in my area. I even did like some big conferences. I got to sing at Dodger Stadium, like a lot of really cool stuff, all just from networking.
That's incredible to hear. I mean, what's so interesting, what I'm hearing about your story is you have all these musicians, and most musicians that I know never went down the business path and didn't study business as well. And I see so many of these talented musicians out there that do get discouraged, and they decide, I can't do this, or I'm not a business person. So they don't pursue it, unfortunately. And then they go down some other career path. But it's interesting to hear your story where you had the two mixed together. And I don't know whether that was, totally on purpose or by happenstance that it happened. But my guess is you could probably attribute a lot of your success, even in back when you were performing for the moms, to the business background that you had, right?
Definitely. I think it originally was a plan B. And then along the way, like I realized, this is like plan A and plan B should be put together to make plan C, which is the best plan.
Yeah. I almost wonder, I mean, I've got several friends who are doctors, and they've told me, and dentists as well. And they've told me that they go to school for all these years to be a doctor or dentist. And then they come out and like, they don't have any clue how to run a business. There's not been any business class or how to have a practice, but all of a sudden they're supposed to be able to magically run their business. And there's a lot of dentists and doctors that end up failing because of that. And I think the same is true with musicians, that it is almost like they should require the classes in business for any degree. If there's a chance you're going to be an entrepreneur, or a high likelihood, it should be a requirement, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, my daughter is considering becoming a therapist, and she's already told me, she's like, I don't like the business stuff, but I'm counting on you to help me figure out how to run my business. Like, she knows, being around me, that like she needs to have some of those skills, or at least she needs to have someone in her corner that can be the business side of her business. And you're right. It's pretty much the same for everyone, especially including musicians. And I think that we've made some serious strides since I went to college in the 90s of adding that business in. I mean, I've been seeing at the college my husband works at, and then like a lot of other students, especially if they go somewhere like Berkeley or Belmont, they're getting more of the business side. I went to very much like it wasn't a conservatory at all. It was a liberal arts school, but it was focused only on, the music side, like the practical ability side versus the, what are you going to do with this side?
The wording you used to describe your daughter, I think this is a lesson I would, that I've learned over the years in observing a lot of people, but you just said she's going to depend on you to do it and help her with that. But what's so funny is, like, with people who are scared of being an entrepreneur or doing the business side, when I was in school, I think back to my college days, there was an entrepreneurship class that I could have taken, and it was the last thing I wanted to do. Like, it stressed me out. I thought, no way, no how, I'm not going to do that. And I was a business major, because after I lasted 3 days in the music program, and I dropped out and went over to the business school. Thank goodness. I mean, I attribute most of my success in the music career business to studying business and marketing and learning that. But what I've seen over the years is those musicians, and really with any career, those who are willing to proactively say, I may not like this, but I see the value and the need for it. I'm going to dive in and figure it out. And I think that's almost the difference maker in a lot of people's, financial success in whatever their career might be, is if they're willing to say, I got to figure this out and really dive in and go full steam ahead on it. Yeah,
no, I totally agree. And the thing with my daughter is she's worked for me since she was 11. She's now 19. And she sees that, like, yes, you absolutely need all this business stuff. And like you said, it's not her favorite part. Like, she's more of the, the creative, like, she'd much rather like sit around and create images for social media than actually have to do, a lot of the business stuff and the money stuff. She's not interested in that, but she knows it's important, and she'll do it if she has to for her business, or she'll figure out who she needs to bring onto her team. But at least she can understand all those things, right?
Absolutely. Well, and so your story up through, I mean, you're very successful as a performing artist, musician. We'll call it living the dream a little bit, but I know now you're this place where you're coaching, you've coached hundreds and hundreds of musicians, if not thousands. I don't even know what your numbers are, but
I'd say thousands. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're this very successful business coach and music business coach. How did you end up transitioning from singing for moms with preschoolers to all of a sudden coaching thousands of musicians to do business stuff?
So, it's such a twisty path that like you never know where it's going to end up when you start doing certain things. So what I did while I was as, a musician touring and all that stuff, I had this like side thing that I had created back in like the early 2000s where you could first start creating online radio stations. And I'd created this online radio station at Live 365 because I wanted to listen to all this music by female artists that I liked at work. Like that's literally why I created it. It was before iPods or any of that stuff. Like I was like, I want to put these MP3s somewhere that I can hear them at work. So I put them on this radio station and I called it Women of Substance because that was my whole thing. Like, it's music that's like really good, high quality, great lyrics, all that. And I just put it there for myself. But then all these other people started subscribing to it. And I was like, oh, I guess people like this, but then like, I don't know, mid 2000, like 2005-ish, once I had like a baby and I was kind of distracted from it, they started charging money in order to run it. And I was like, oh, this was just kind of a hobby. And I just like let it die for a couple of years. And then when I was home with my daughter and I was like, what could I do in music to like help female artists? Because I was meeting a lot of great female artists when I was touring and everything. I'm like, there's just not enough representation out there on the radio, on Sirius XM or anything. And so I'm like, oh, Women of Substance. I created this thing. I wonder if I could bring it back and like expand it. And so that was like the seed of an idea. And I just said, okay, well, I just need to figure out how to break even at first. Right? Because I don't want to have to spend money on this thing. So I figured out how to take submissions from indie artists and I started putting other people's music on there beyond what I liked. But I would, choose good music and all different genres. And then it just started getting bigger and bigger. Like I started getting people saying like, hey, do you take advertising and things like that? And so it blew up into a commercial station. And then when we got to around 2014, I saw that like the podcasting was the direction things were going and online radio was kind of stagnant. So we converted it to a podcast. It's been running as a podcast since 2014. We're on episode 1350 or something crazy like that. And all this to say, like, how did this turn me into a coach? Well, I had built up a huge following by female indie artists that I was building an email list, building socials all around Women of Substance. I was helping all these artists get more exposure. And then they started coming to me, asking me questions. Well, how did you get gigs when you were performing? And how did you get more eyes on your stuff? Or how are you building this community around Women of Substance? And so I realized, I could really help them. And at the same time, my second daughter was getting into kindergarten and my husband was kind of like, I think you should go back to work. You worked in corporate, like you could go back to work. And so I went and started interviewing for jobs. And I distinctly remember going to this interview and then going back for a second interview. It was an accounting job for Pizza Factory. And I got home and I was like, I hope they don't choose me. And I'm like, why am I saying that? Why am I saying I don't want this job? And then I realized that what I really wanted to do was work online. And I wanted to expand what I built with Women of Substance and helping female indie artists. And that was 2014, 2015. I started my female entrepreneur musician podcast. I started my academy and that's how it all started. And it's now been 7 years.
The types of musicians you've ended up working with, is it just across the board, all types of music, or is there a type of music that you feel like you're really connect with well?
I would say singer-songwriter. So, encompassing like folk, singer-songwriter, adult contemporary, pop to some extent. Now, we cover all genres, and I've worked with musicians of all genres, but I really identify with the singer-songwriter, somebody who has a message, something that they really want to say with their music, a cause they want to get behind, or just they want to tell stories with their music.
Okay. Awesome. And what, I'm curious you've worked with all of these people and helped them, helping these musicians try to find some version of success. What would you describe as success in the music career, after having worked with thousands of musicians now?
To me, success is really about building a group of people that are eagerly anticipating your next thing, your next release, your next show, your next anything. Because I think that the hardest part is to find your people. And if you find your people, that is going to keep you going, because they're, they're there wondering when you're going to put out something new. Otherwise, if you don't have that, it's like, well, why should I even work on this song? No one's going to hear it anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, yeah, all of that, like the fan base does lead to income, and it can be however you want. Like I work with so many people who have retired from corporate, and, they're doing music in their retirement, or they raise their children and now they want to get back to doing music. And so like, it looks different for everybody, but having that system where you're like, okay, I've got these people and I cannot wait to deliver something new to them because I know they're going to love it. That's what's really going to lead to the income that you want. And however much time you have to spend on music, that's going to, show up in how much income you're bringing in. And you need to figure out how that fits into your life. I don't think that success means you make $100,000 a year from music. Maybe it just means that you have another job, but you do this on the weekends and you love it and you can't wait to do it. And you make enough money to pay for all your gear and your gas money and whatever. Like, it's whatever is going to make you feel like it's worth it and that you want to keep doing it.
So if you were talking to a young musician, somebody who's in high school or just going into college, what advice would you have for them as they're kind of starting down that path and trying to decide, do I want to try and do music or not do music? What advice would you have for that individual?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to get a mentor. Like, I wish I would have had a mentor earlier, because I did waste a lot of time. I say 10 years while I was working at the opera, and then even part of the time after that, because I didn't have a blueprint or a framework or anything to follow. I was just kind of like trying stuff out, and then that didn't work. Let's try this. If you get somebody that's even a little bit ahead of you, they can easily tell you, oh, I wouldn't go down that path. Why don't you try this? This is what worked for me. And it's not to say that like, what works for someone else is definitely going to work for you, but they can give you a lot of things that probably won't work for you. And so I wish I would have had that, and I did eventually get that somewhat. I got involved in kind of a mastermind kind of group of female musicians that were doing what I wanted to do. And they'd all been in it a little longer than I had. And it made it so much easier, because when I was like, I don't how do I approach the subject of how much they're going to pay me when I'm calling about a gig? Like, I just didn't have a clue. And they'd be like, oh, here's what I say. You know what I mean? Instead of me like wasting hours on the phone doing a terrible job and not getting any gigs, just to hear what they have to say. And like, this is what's worked for me. And then I can get on the phone and actually have it start working immediately. So I think that my biggest advice is find people that are already doing what you want to do and learn from them. And if you have to pay them to do that, that's okay. I mean, you'd be paying to go to college. Like, I would never say like, don't pay a mentor. Like, what they have to say and their experiences are valuable.
Absolutely.
And like on that same vein, like if you can't pay for a mentor, or if you want to, find a group like I did, it was just more like a community. And that's why I've been so big on community in my coaching career, is that if I hadn't have had that community, I wouldn't have been able to figure things out as fast, but I also would have felt so alone. And I probably would have given up because I didn't have anyone who understood what I was going through. And having people understand why it's so important to you to do music is one of the biggest things, because most people that aren't musicians don't get it.
Right.
They just don't get it. Like there is no, I can't do music. Like I have to do music. It's like built into my bones and the fabric of my body, and people don't get that unless they're musicians.
It can be, I think musicians and entrepreneurs, it can be a very lonely place. And I think a lot of times the normal, we'll call it there's like the crazy 5% of us that are probably that, musician or entrepreneur. And, the rest of the world looks at us like we're absolutely crazy and they don't get it. But I think, and a lot of times they discourage people from doing that. I don't know if it's like out of fear or if it's lack of understanding of, because they don't think the same way. And, when it comes to approaching risk in their mind.
Yeah. I mean, if it's our family members, I think they're definitely doing it in order they think they're protecting us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's good to like, look at that in love and be like, I really appreciate that you're trying to protect me, but like, this is very important to me and here's why, and here's my plan. And hopefully they'll understand when you tell them that.
Right. Absolutely. It's great. I love what you said about, paying a mentor, if you can find that right mentor to do it for free. But I think as I look back at school, you're paying thousands of dollars to go to these college classes. And somehow, when you graduate, I see a lot of people like that's the last class they ever will spend money on. And now they're not going to invest in learning because apparently they know everything,
Mm-hmm.
when you're 22 or 23 or whatever age you graduate at. But I think those people that recognize the value in education and learning they continue to reinvest. And, if you're willing to spend that in college, why wouldn't you spend $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 a year in education every single year of your life to get smarter?
Totally. And I mean, I think other people's perspectives are worth paying for. I always have either some kind of mentor or some kind of mastermind that I'm involved in, if not both, because there's so many things that you can't see because you are in your own bubble. And just getting those outside perspectives, I think is golden.
Absolutely. The key is learning to recognize the ones that are going to be valuable. And I think you learn the hard way sometimes with some that were like, that was my worst experience. I think I spent $10,000 on a course one time that was maybe worth $1,000, if that, unfortunately. But I've had some, one of my very best ones I did was $100 course that, so anyway, I would have paid $10,000 for that one. So I'm curious, speaking of courses, was there a time or was there a specific course or learning event that happened in your life where it was like that tipping point where you had that aha moment where, all of a sudden things started to click more than had ever happened before in your life?
You mean about business or music or
business, music, or just like this aha, like, oh my gosh, it was something you invested in or book you read, something that happened to make you feel like you really had that tipping point moment?
Gosh. Yeah, I would say probably when I became a podcaster. So when I realized that like you could get paid for talking for a living, like I always really enjoyed like talking on stage and that kind of thing. And when I decided to start my podcast where I was helping musicians, I just immediately realized like I love doing this. I love teaching. I love interviewing. I just love like bringing out the good stories, the golden nuggets, all that stuff. I really enjoy that. And that's why I ended up to go on, to do summits and things like that. because I just really enjoy it. But it also just helped me realize that like I was a good teacher, and I come from a family of teachers. And so like, my husband's a college professor, my aunts and uncles, they're all teachers. And so I always said, oh, I'm never going to be a teacher. I don't want to be a teacher. I'm not interested in that. I'm a musician. But then I think from going from podcast to summit to just doing all the courses that I've done and teaching in many different ways in like live at, places like ASCAP and stuff, I just realized I really love teaching. And I love like figuring out how to make something a system that people can follow and break it down to a step-by-step where people, just feel like they really get the flow of it. But I think once I started doing the podcast, that was like the slow march to me realizing that I was actually a really good teacher and I really enjoyed it, and something that I never expected.
Interesting. That's in hearing you tell that story. What's funny is what you also said coming out of that is that you enjoyed seeing the other people succeed, and I think almost that's a good teacher. So my wife's a teacher, my mother was a teacher as well, and I think when you get around people that are really good at that craft, they just thrive when their students are successful, but they don't necessarily realize. I think sometimes we don't realize that that's really what makes us tick, and makes us want to be a teacher, and makes you enjoy it in the end. So. Anyway.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I attribute so much of where I'm at with teachers. Actually, I'm about to go in a couple of weeks to celebrate my choir teacher from high school's 80th birthday. And she's having like this huge reunion of all the choir people that were in her choirs.
Oh,
and
fun.
I'm like, gosh, if I hadn't have had her, like, I have no idea where I would be. And
Absolutely.
Same thing with my teacher in college that ran the group that, we performed all over the place. Like, without those two people, I would be a completely different person.
Yep. And we need more teachers in our lives for sure, because the impact they have is so powerful. I don't think they realize it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of teachers never get to have that 80th birthday party where they get to see the fruits of what they actually accomplished. So awesome. So speaking of like helping other people, I know you have several really amazing courses that you give away. You mentioned earlier that there's one that came to mind. Tell me a little bit about that and tell people where they can go find it.
Yeah, it's a resource. One thing I noticed when I first started helping musicians is that they were like, there's not really very many ways to make money from music. And I'm like, yes, there is. So I created kind of this income guide of all these ways that you could make money from music that you hadn't thought of, especially that didn't include like performing, because during the pandemic, we obviously couldn't do that. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody, because everybody knows, you can just go perform and make money, but there's so many other things. So you can grab that at profitablemusician.com/income. It is 15 sources of income you can tap right now for your music career. And it covers like a lot of different things that you might not have thought of.
Awesome. And it's totally free download.
Yep.
I mean, Bree's she's an awesome person where she's always looking to add value. So thank you for doing that. Bree, it's been really fun chatting with you today. We're going to have to, I know you've got a lot of other stories that I'm aware of that we haven't even had time to get into. So we'll have to have you back again. But I appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for all you're doing for the music community and helping people to believe in themselves and hopefully find that success for them. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I love that you're doing this podcast for musicians.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, it's Jason here, and I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this episode. Be sure to check out our show notes to learn more about our guest today, and if you'd like to support our podcast, there's a few things that you can do to help us grow. First, if you hit subscribe, it will help ensure that you don't miss a future episode. Second, if you'll share it with your friends on social media or send it via email or message, it helps us spread the word as well. And third, if you'll leave an honest review, it really helps with the algorithms so that other people can find our podcast. Finding success and fulfillment in the music industry is possible, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.